Hey guys, tonight we take a stroll through the lively streets of ancient Rome, where beneath the towering columns and grand structures, an entirely different world unfolded. One of silent performances, expressive gestures, and music that spoke louder than words. You probably won't survive this journey without a few laughs, and perhaps a touch of confusion, as we explore the fascinating and oddly charming tradition of Roman pantomime. Pantomime, an art form so filled with drama and emotion that words were completely unnecessary. Imagine being in ancient Rome, walking down cobblestone streets, hearing distant music, and suddenly catching the flutter of a performer's cloak as they leap and twirl in front of an enthusiastic crowd. It wasn't just a performance, it was a spectacle. The crowd, whether rich senators or ordinary citizens, was absolutely captivated by these performances, where the only language spoken was through exaggerated facial expressions, sweeping gestures, and evocative body movements. It's all a little hard to picture in our modern world, right? A world of dialogue and action-packed blockbusters, where a simple action signals the start of a scene. But in ancient Rome, the magic was all in the silence. Pantomime in ancient Rome, though often overlooked, was one of the most popular forms of entertainment. And no, it's not the silent acting you see on street corners today. Roman pantomimes were more than mere acts. They were a whirlwind of emotion, drama, and intense performances that could leave you laughing, crying, or perhaps just staring in stunned confusion. This all started in the late Roman Republic and really took off during the empire's rise. At first, the art form might have seemed like a simple dance or mime, but with time, it became something more, something extraordinary. Performers weren't just moving to music, they were telling stories without saying a single word. They danced their tales, often recounting grand epics, fables, or historical events, all while wearing elaborate costumes and engaging with live music. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You can imagine how, in a world filled with so much chaos and political upheaval, a little bit of silent escape through the art of performance became the perfect outlet. As you settle deeper into the tale, let's talk about the roots of Roman pantomime and how it came to be such an intrinsic part of Roman life. Picture yourself in a Roman theater, the audience packed into the stone amphitheater, the air filled with the anticipation of what's to come. But what exactly was this performance? How did a bunch of actors who, let's be honest, weren't even speaking, manage to stir such emotions from their audience? Roman pantomime didn't just appear out of nowhere. It had roots in earlier Greek traditions, blending Greek theatrical concepts with the growing tastes of Roman audiences. You see, the Greeks were already big on theatrical performances. Their tragedies and comedies were the heart and soul of Greek theater. But the Romans, well, they had their own spin on it. When they started adopting the Greek love of theater, they needed something that could entertain their expanding empire. So, they turned to pantomime, a form of entertainment that didn't rely on dialogue. Instead, it used music and movement to communicate. Historians still argue over the exact origins of Roman pantomime. Some claim it was directly inspired by the Greek satiric drama, a genre that included large doses of dance and song, minus the dialogue. Others say it came from the Etruscans, who influenced early Roman culture with their own dramatic traditions. One thing is certain, though, this art form became uniquely Roman in its own right. Pantomime performances were part dance, part theatrical storytelling, and often part spectacle, making them the ideal form of entertainment for the Roman masses. What sets pantomime apart from other forms of entertainment is that it was completely silent. No dialogue, no scripted lines, just pure, unspoken emotion. The actors would use their entire bodies to tell stories, their faces contorting into exaggerated expressions to convey fear, joy, anger, or sadness. They would move in large, dramatic sweeps, performing every action, whether it was a chase scene or a love story, with precision and flair. The absence of spoken words didn't hinder the performance. It was what made it so effective. In fact, in some ways, it made it even more universal. No matter what language you spoke, the movement and emotion were clear for all to see. Now, imagine the grandeur of it all. Elaborate costumes, live music swelling as the performers danced and gestured their way through epic tales. It wasn't a simple skit. It was a full-on production, with the pantomime telling the entire story without ever needing a word. In Roman society, this form of theater didn't just entertain, it captivated the audience in a way that few other forms of entertainment could. It was a method of storytelling that required absolute focus and emotion. And when done well, it could stir the heart and move the soul. And let's be honest, who doesn't love a good drama with no talking? Now that you have a better sense of where this whole pantomime business started, let's take a closer look at the actors themselves. Imagine you're in one of those grand Roman theaters. The kind where the seats stretch upward in a semicircle and the marble floors gleam under the flickering torchlight. You're seated. The air smells faintly of the Mediterranean breeze, and a hush falls over the crowd as the curtain rises. The stage is set, literally, by performers who have perfected their craft of nonverbal storytelling. These performers were no ordinary actors. Roman pantomime actors were essentially athletes of the stage, expected to embody the full range of human emotion without uttering a single word. Think about it. They had to convey the depth of an entire tragedy with nothing but movement. Their faces needed to show the kind of emotion that would have had people laughing, crying, or gasping in shock, all while maintaining the perfect, smooth execution of every movement. It was a skill that required years of practice, precision, and an incredible understanding of human gestures. The costumes were key, too. The actors wore elaborate garments that helped the audience distinguish between characters and emotions. These weren't just any costumes. They were designed to help bring the pantomimes to life. You'd see actors in flowing robes, bright sashes, and sometimes even elaborate masks that added a bit of mystery to the character they portrayed. Imagine a hero draped in vibrant blue and gold, a villain swathed in deep red, each movement of the costume echoing their role in the story. Historians still argue whether the pantomime actors were considered actors in the same way we think of them today, as part of a respected, professional theater tradition. Some even claim that these performers were more akin to dancers or musicians, as they blended all three arts into one performance. Whatever the case, these pantomime artists had a special place in Roman entertainment, and their performances were seen as both high art and popular amusement, blending sophisticated themes with broad appeal. But here's the kicker. While pantomimes were seriously intense, they weren't all drama and tragedy. No. There was plenty of room for humor, too. Romans loved a good laugh, and the pantomime actors were known to bring a touch of comic relief even in the most dramatic moments. Imagine a performer pretending to be a bumbling, over-the-top fool, tripping over themselves or making exaggerated facial expressions as they accidentally foiled a plot or confused the characters around them. These comedic moments were key to balancing the heavy emotions of the more intense acts. In a way, these actors didn't just perform a story, they became the heart and soul of it. The room would fall into a deep silence as they performed, and the audience would hang on every gesture, every pause, every tilt of the head. It was mesmerizing. But of course, it wasn't all fun and games, especially for the performers themselves. The pressure to convey such complex emotions without words was immense. They were not only entertaining a crowd, but doing so in a way that transcended language. It's no wonder these actors were so revered, yet also somewhat mysterious figures in Roman society. They walked a thin line between being adored stars and slightly oddball characters who could, at any moment, slip into wild overacting and goofy antics. Now that you've met the actors and seen their dramatic, silent performances, let's dive into the next fascinating element of Roman pantomimes: music. You see, while the actors remained silent, the orchestra behind them was far from quiet. Pantomime performances were accompanied by live music. And this wasn't just some background noise. No, this music was a crucial part of the performance, providing the emotional depth that the actors' movements couldn't express on their own. Imagine sitting in the audience, the flickering torches casting shadows over the marble columns, and hearing the soft strains of a lyre or flute building up as the scene intensifies. Roman pantomimes were accompanied by what we would now consider a small orchestra, though they often kept things simple with instruments like the lyre, flute, and percussion. The lyre was a favorite, with its soft, plucked strings creating a peaceful or melancholic backdrop. The flute, too, could be used to mimic a bird's trill or the distant sound of a flute player in the woods, adding a natural, almost mystical quality to the performance. And let's not forget the percussion instruments. Drums and cymbals were used to create sudden bursts of sound, often accompanying dramatic moments where the pantomime actors made large, sweeping gestures or experienced emotional outbursts. It wasn't just about the instruments themselves. It was the way they worked together to create an atmosphere that was more than the sum of its parts. Historians still debate whether the music was pre-composed or whether it was improvised live during the performance. Some believe that musicians would follow cues from the actors' movements, adjusting the music in real time to match the pace of the action, while others argue that certain music had to be carefully rehearsed to fit the grand, emotionally charged moments. But there's something wonderfully ironic about the role music played in pantomimes. While the actors were silently communicating intense emotions, the music was free to be as dramatic and expressive as it wanted. The contrast between the actors' silent intensity and the sometimes wild or flowing music must have created an extraordinary dynamic. One could only imagine the effect on the audience. How the swelling of music would make their hearts race, their eyes fixed on the actors, waiting for the next dramatic movement. The music wasn't just there to support the acting. It was almost another character in the performance. If you've ever watched a suspenseful movie scene where the music becomes the heartbeat of the moment, you can imagine how integral the music was in Roman pantomimes. The swelling strings could signal a moment of joy or love, while the sudden crash of cymbals could send the performance into an entirely new, more dramatic direction. The music added layers of meaning to the silent gestures, guiding the audience's emotions through each twist and turn of the story. It wasn't always serious music either. There were often playful or whimsical tunes for comedic pantomimes, where the actors' movements mimicked the light-hearted nature of the performance. It's almost as if the musicians were given the same freedom as the actors, able to respond to what was happening on stage in real time and, in doing so, amplify the emotions the actors were working so hard to convey. So, next time you're in a theater and hear the music building up, think back to those ancient Roman performances, where music and movement danced together, weaving a story that left the audience captivated, laughing, crying, or simply mesmerized by the beauty of it all. As we step deeper into the fascinating world of Roman pantomimes, it's time to think about the setting. Imagine that you're sitting in one of the grand Roman theaters, the air thick with the anticipation of what's to come. You're surrounded by a vast crowd, all eager for the next performance. The stage is set, and everything is primed for the dramatic display of a pantomime. These theaters were architectural wonders, designed not only for sound and sight, but for creating an atmosphere of awe. Roman theaters were enormous, designed to hold thousands of spectators. The layout of the theater was built to ensure that every member of the audience had the best seat in the house, whether they were sitting at the very top or right by the stage. The seating was tiered, often made of stone and stretching upward, giving everyone a clear view of the action. The stage, too, was impressive. It was raised, with elaborate backdrops and intricate stage designs that made the performers seem larger than life. It wasn't just a stage, it was a spectacle. The entire space was designed to enhance the visual impact of the performances, with sunlight streaming through open roofs during the day or torches flickering during evening shows, casting an ethereal glow over the actors as they performed. The size of these theaters was often overwhelming. Think about how you might feel in one of these ancient venues: thousands of spectators, a huge open space, and the performers, so small, yet somehow so powerful in their movements. The acoustics of these buildings were carefully engineered, allowing even the faintest sound from the orchestra to reach the farthest seat in the house. This meant that every whispered gesture or dramatic movement was felt by the audience, no matter where they sat. Imagine being in that crowd, hearing the swish of an actor's cloak as they glide across the stage, and feeling the music reverberate through the air. It must have been magical, an immersive experience that left the audience spellbound. The theater wasn't just a place for art. It was also an essential part of Roman social life. Pantomime performances were a way for people to escape the stresses of daily life and immerse themselves in a world of drama, joy, and suspense. But these performances weren't just for entertainment. They had a deeper cultural role. In a society like ancient Rome, where public life and personal reputation were so important, performances like these were a way for the wealthy and powerful to show off their status, as well as their taste in the arts. Imagine a Roman senator, lounging with his friends, nodding his head appreciatively as the music swells and the dancers twirl across the stage. These performances weren't just fun. They were a statement, an opportunity to show that one was part of the cultural elite. And it wasn't just the wealthy who attended. Pantomimes had mass appeal. While the high-ranking Romans might have seen the performances as a sophisticated form of art, the general public flocked to the theaters as well. The shows were an escape for everyone, from the ruling elite to the commoners, who likely enjoyed the humor and excitement of the performances just as much as the high drama. It's clear that pantomime performances became a shared experience, one that united Romans from all walks of life in their collective appreciation of theater and music. The theater's grandeur and the mesmerizing performances would have transported the audience to a different world, one where the lines between reality and fiction blurred, with no spoken words to distract from the music and movement. Each act felt like a dream, unfolding right before their eyes. It's easy to see how the theater, with its powerful atmosphere and thrilling performances, became one of the most beloved forms of entertainment in ancient Rome. Now, let's take a closer look at one of the most unique aspects of Roman pantomimes: how they often played out during grand feasts and banquets. Imagine yourself at a lavish Roman banquet. The long tables piled high with exotic foods, rich wines flowing in golden goblets, and the chatter of Roman elites mingling with the faint echo of the city's hustle outside. The mood is light, and the evening seems to stretch on forever. The host, eager to entertain his guests and perhaps show off his taste for the finer things, turns to the performers for entertainment. Enter the pantomimes. At these banquets, performances were often used as a form of entertainment for the guests. In fact, these silent performances were a key feature at many Roman feasts. Imagine a room full of high-ranking individuals, all caught up in conversation, and then, just as easily as a snap, the room grows still as a group of performers enters the space. The actors would take their places, the orchestra would strike up a tune, and the audience would be transported into a world of dramatic storytelling, without a word spoken. Feasts in the Roman world were elaborate affairs, not just centered around food, but also around social status. This is where pantomimes came in. They weren't just shows to pass the time. They were a reflection of wealth, culture, and sophistication. A feast without entertainment would have been considered a dull affair. Imagine yourself in this scene. The sounds of the orchestra fill the air. The performers, clothed in their grand costumes, create a spectacle of emotion. And for a few moments, the bustling of the feast fades into the background as the drama takes center stage. The types of performances varied, of course. They weren't all tragic or overly serious. Pantomimes during banquets often had a comedic flair, a perfect way to lighten the mood after a rich, multi-course meal. The actors would portray exaggerated versions of everyday people, bakers, soldiers, or bumbling servants, and their antics would bring laughter to the guests. The humor wasn't subtle, it was broad and exaggerated, with physical comedy that could be understood by anyone, regardless of social status. These comedic pantomimes were almost like early slapstick, over the top, physical humor that made the audience burst out laughing. Historians still argue whether these comedic pantomimes were as highbrow as the dramatic ones, or if they were considered to be more of a form of popular, lowbrow entertainment. What we do know, however, is that both types were equally important in the Roman social scene. In fact, many Roman elites would have enjoyed both, the drama to show off their refined taste, and the humor to simply enjoy a good laugh. It was a perfect blend of sophistication and levity, which is why pantomimes became a fixture of Roman dining. As you sit at this grand Roman banquet, the performers dance and act out their tales. And for a few brief moments, the extravagant world around you becomes distant. You're no longer in the company of politicians and aristocrats. You're swept up in a tragic love story or an absurd, laugh-out-loud scenario. And, as the performance concludes, the crowd erupts into applause, glasses clinking, and the evening carries on, forever marked by the vibrant energy of the silent actors who, for a brief time, took the spotlight. Now, as you sit back and soak in the drama and spectacle of Roman pantomimes, let's talk about the costumes, the true visual spectacle that helped bring these performances to life. Picture this: the actors, draped in flowing garments of silk, wool, and fine linen, their faces painted with dramatic expressions. every fold and crease of their costume contributing to the story they were telling. The costumes weren't just clothes. They were a key part of the performance, helping to define characters, moods, and even entire scenes. In the world of Roman pantomime, a performer's costume was like a canvas. The colors, fabrics, and decoration spoke volumes, helping the audience immediately recognize who the actor was supposed to be, without a single word being said. You could always tell who the hero was, perhaps a gleaming white toga, trimmed in gold, symbolizing their nobility. The villain, on the other hand, might wear deep red, signifying danger and blood, or perhaps black, signaling mystery and malice. And then there were the comedic characters, often dressed in garish, mismatched colors to highlight their ridiculousness or foolishness. These costumes didn't just serve a practical purpose, they were designed to enhance the emotions and actions of the actors. The materials used were also significant. Roman pantomime costumes were often made from the finest available textiles. Silks and brightly dyed wool were favorites, both to demonstrate the wealth of the performer and to convey the luxurious nature of the stories being told. As the actors moved, these flowing garments would catch the light, emphasizing every turn and twist, every leap and pirouette. It was a visual feast, and the costumes only added to the grandeur. Imagine an actor in an elaborate robe, their movements so smooth and fluid, the fabric seeming to float around them as they danced and told their tale. It was as much about the visual impact as it was about the story. But costumes weren't just for effect. They were crucial to the storytelling itself. A performer's attire often gave subtle hints about the character they were playing. The subtle difference in a sleeve, the trim along the hem, or the color of a sash could tell you everything you needed to know about the character's role in the story. A simple change in costume could transform an actor from a benevolent king into a wicked sorcerer, or from a tragic lover into a comic fool. And let's not forget the masks, sometimes worn, sometimes not. But when they were used, they added a layer of mystery and grandeur to the character. These masks, often made of painted wood or plaster, could make the actor's expressions even more exaggerated, with wide, open eyes and exaggerated features that amplified every gesture. Historians still debate how exactly the costumes worked in practice. Were they always as elaborate as we imagine? Or did the cost of such grand attire limit their use to only the wealthiest performances? Some evidence suggests that in large public performances, such as those in the Colosseum, actors might have worn simpler, more functional costumes, while the more intimate shows in the private homes of the elite would feature more luxurious attire, whether elaborate or simple. However, one thing is certain: the costumes were always designed to make a statement. They were a visual language of their own, helping to communicate the nuances of each character, and in some cases, even the story itself. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer impact of seeing a pantomime unfold in these grand costumes. The actors would glide across the stage, their garments billowing out behind them, the faintest whisper of fabric moving with every dramatic gesture. The audience, completely immersed, would barely notice the silence, caught instead by the sheer beauty of the performance. The costumes were as much a part of the storytelling as the actors' movements. And without them, the pantomimes would not have had the same effect. As we delve deeper into the world of Roman pantomimes, it's impossible to ignore the lighter side of this fascinating art form. You might have imagined pantomimes as all grandeur and drama, with ancient heroes and grand myths unfolding in dramatic silence. But as you're about to find out. Not all performances were filled with gravitas. No. Some pantomimes in ancient Rome were downright hilarious, blending humor with silent action to entertain the masses. And let's be honest, what would any great performance be without a little comic relief? Roman comedy, in fact, played an essential role in the development of pantomime. While many pantomimes were epic, focusing on gods, battles, and tragedies, there were also performances aimed at simply making people laugh. Imagine a performer running across the stage, tripping over their own feet, or mimicking exaggerated facial expressions that made every action feel absurd and hilarious. These comedic performances often featured slapstick humor, where the actors used physical gestures and movements to create humor, similar to what we might recognize today in silent films or physical comedy. But what made Roman pantomime comedy so special? It wasn't just about the physical humor, though there was plenty of that. It was also about the characters. In these comedic pantomimes, performers often took on exaggerated roles, people you could instantly recognize by their silly behaviors and costumes. Picture a pompous merchant strutting around the stage with a huge, ridiculous hat, or a clumsy servant who can't help but knock over every prop in sight. The comedy wasn't subtle. It was big, broad, and designed to get the audience laughing immediately. The kind of humor that needed no words, only exaggerated gestures and the sheer joy of watching someone make a fool of themselves. Historians still debate the exact structure of these comedic pantomimes, how they balanced physical humor with the emotional depth of more dramatic performances. It's unclear how often these performances were purely comedic versus dramatic. But we know that humor was a critical part of the Roman pantomime tradition, the social dynamics of Rome, where everything from politics to personal status was so carefully regulated, likely made these performances an important outlet for public enjoyment. The humor was often an exaggerated commentary on daily life, mocking the upper class, poking fun at social norms, or simply providing a means of collective release for the audience. Imagine sitting in the audience of one of these comedic pantomimes, your laughter mingling with that of the other spectators. The performers would twist and turn, their movements deliberate and silly, their exaggerated faces pulling every trick in the book to get a laugh. The silence on stage would be punctuated only by the sound of laughter from the crowd and the occasional slap of a drum or cymbal from the orchestra to highlight a particularly silly moment. You'd be sitting there, eyes wide with amusement, caught up in the fun, as the performers showed just how entertaining it could be to make fun of the world around them. And while these comedic pantomimes were aimed at providing relief and joy, they also provided a rare space for the performers to show off their skill. The actors weren't just playing for laughs. They were using their mastery of movement and physicality to elicit genuine humor from the audience. And as anyone who's tried to pull off a comedic routine knows, it's not easy. These performers were masters of their craft, able to make an audience laugh without saying a single word. Their movements, timing, and gestures had to be precise, each small motion building upon the last, creating a symphony of silent comedy that could bring an entire crowd to tears with laughter. As we continue this journey through the world of Roman pantomimes, let's turn our attention to the audiences, those thousands of Romans who flocked to the theaters, eager to escape the complexities of their daily lives and immerse themselves in the world of silent performances. Imagine yourself sitting in the crowd, the air thick with anticipation, the large stone theater around you vibrating with excitement as the lights dim. You're surrounded by people from all walks of life, each of them here for the same reason: to be swept away by the drama, humor, an artistry of the pantomime. Roman theaters were not just places of entertainment, they were social hubs. People attended performances not only for the love of the art, but also as a way to be seen, to mingle with their peers, and perhaps to show off their cultural refinement. Think of it like going to a movie premiere today. The event itself becomes as much a spectacle as the performance. Theaters were large, sometimes holding up to 20,000 people. And the experience of watching a pantomime was far from private. It was a communal event where you could hear the collective gasps, sighs, and laughter of your fellow Romans, creating a shared experience unlike anything else. But here's where it gets interesting. The Roman elite were often seen in the front rows, lavishly dressed, paying close attention to the performances. But even the plebeians, the common folk, had their place in the theater, and their experience was just as important. In fact, pantomimes were loved by everyone. The drama, the physical comedy, the music, they were accessible to all. Whether you were a senator or a laborer, you could appreciate the artistry of the actors and the thrilling nature of the performances. It was a truly democratic form of entertainment, where the elite and the working-class Romans could come together, united in their love of theater, regardless of their social standing. The sounds of the audience must have been something to behold. Imagine the whispers, the soft laughter, the gasps of awe as a particularly dramatic or comic moment unfolded. The orchestra, positioned off to the side, would add their music, matching the actors' movements as they conveyed the highs and lows of the story. The interaction between the performers and the audience was so deeply ingrained in the experience of pantomime that it would have been hard to imagine one without the other. The energy in the air was palpable. The actors would feed off the crowd's energy, and in return, the crowd would be swept up in the story the actors were telling, even if it was through only the movement of their bodies and the music. Interestingly, historians still debate whether Roman pantomimes were always meant to be purely entertaining, or if they also served as a form of social commentary. Some scholars suggest that pantomimes often reflected the political and cultural climate of the time, with certain performances commenting on the society's moral failings or its social injustices. After all, the performers were often skilled in portraying complex characters and situations, and the nature of their art form meant they could convey a great deal without saying a word. The actors, through their exaggerated expressions and dramatic movements, could tell stories that subtly addressed the concerns of Roman society, without openly confronting them. It's fascinating to think that, under the guise of entertainment, these performers may have been providing a silent critique of the world around them, all while making their audience laugh and cry. In many ways, Roman pantomimes provided more than just entertainment. They created a space for reflection and connection. The audience wasn't just a passive observer of the performance, they were part of it. Their reactions, laughter, tears, gasps, shaped the mood of the show. And the performers, in turn, responded to these cues. It was an interactive experience, one that bridged the gap between performer and audience, creating a shared moment of emotional expression. As we continue exploring the captivating world of Roman pantomimes, it's time to talk about one of the most intriguing aspects of these performances: the controversies surrounding them. While pantomimes were incredibly popular and widely enjoyed, they weren't without their critics. In a society as complex and hierarchical as ancient Rome, the idea of an art form that broke all the conventional rules, no words, no clear structure, just pure emotion and movement, was bound to stir up some debate. Let's take a moment to imagine. You're at a lavish Roman banquet, a glass of wine in hand, listening to the rhythmic beats of the orchestra as the actors take their places. The music swells, and the performers begin their graceful, silent movements. The crowd is riveted, but somewhere in the back of the theater, an elderly Roman senator furrows his brow, disapproving of what he sees. You see, not everyone was enamored with pantomimes, especially those in the upper echelons of Roman society. For some, pantomimes represented a break from tradition, a way of telling stories that didn't align with the more respectable forms of theater. Historians still debate whether the Roman elite truly saw pantomime as a legitimate art form or just as a form of base entertainment. Pantomimes, with their exaggerated gestures and emotional displays, were sometimes considered too dramatic or too vulgar for the refined tastes of the aristocracy. After all, Roman drama had its roots in more formal Greek theater, where actors recited lines and performances followed a structured narrative. But pantomimes, they were wild, unrestrained, and often focused on exaggerated emotions rather than intellectual themes. For some critics, this made pantomime a bit too crude for their liking. In fact, some political and social leaders used pantomime performances as a way to make statements about Roman society. For example, certain performances were known to include subtle jabs at the political elite, poking fun at their flaws or highlighting their hypocrisy. The ability of the actors to create such nuanced characters through nothing but body language made the performances ideal for delivering veiled criticisms. Imagine an actor, in a bright red costume, playing a corrupt politician or a vain emperor, their every gesture mocking the very people in the audience. In a way, pantomimes allowed Romans to express their frustrations and criticisms in a way that was both entertaining and subversive. This doesn't mean, however, that pantomimes were only about making political statements. There were plenty of performances that were lighthearted, focusing on simple love stories or mythological tales. But the art form's ability to blend humor with serious themes made it a powerful tool in the hands of both the performer and the audience. Still, the controversies surrounding pantomimes didn't end with their social implications. Some Romans also found the physicality of the performances unsettling. Pantomime actors, with their intense movements and exaggerated expressions, sometimes seemed to be performing something akin to a ritual rather than a simple performance. The gestures, the almost trance-like quality of their dances, had an ethereal and mystical quality that some found disturbing. Some critics even claimed that pantomimes could be a form of magic or enchantment, as if the actors were channeling some unseen force to create such powerful emotions in their audience. There was an undercurrent of fear surrounding pantomimes. What were these actors doing? After all, when they could move a crowd to tears without uttering a word? Despite the criticisms, the popularity of pantomimes didn't wane. They continued to be a dominant form of entertainment throughout the Roman Empire, beloved by both the general public and the political elite. They were just too entertaining to be ignored. But the controversies, whether related to their political subtext, their emotional intensity, or their perceived vulgarity, lingered. It's fascinating to think about how this art form, which seems so innocent and fun in our modern eyes, was once at the center of such heated debates about taste, propriety, and the power of performance. As we now move forward, let's consider the role of women in the world of Roman pantomimes. For centuries, women in ancient Rome had limited roles in public performance, while men took center stage in most types of theater and public life. The realm of pantomimes was one of the few areas where women could take on substantial and often leading roles. But this wasn't always the case. The participation of women in these performances was both revolutionary and controversial, challenging the norms of Roman society. Imagine the stage. The audience is gathered. The music begins to swell. And in the midst of the pantomime, a woman steps forward. She's dressed in an extravagant costume. A long, flowing gown adorned with rich colors and textures that speak to her importance in the performance. Her face, carefully painted with bold, dramatic makeup, is a mask of intense emotion. As the performance begins, she moves gracefully, her body telling a story as she dances and gestures. In this world of exaggerated emotion, this woman isn't simply an actor. She's the star. She's leading the show, conveying a complex tale through every movement. Roman pantomimes, unlike their Greek predecessors, offered women more freedom to perform. While most public theater in Rome was dominated by male actors, pantomimes allowed women to portray some of the most important characters, even in historical or mythological settings. These women weren't just background players. They were central figures, representing powerful goddesses, tragic heroines, or cunning villains. In fact, some of the most famous Roman pantomime actors were women, known for their breathtaking performances that captured the audience's heart. However, the inclusion of women in pantomime performances wasn't without its controversies. Roman society was still very conservative when it came to the role of women in public life, and many saw female performers as a challenge to traditional values. There were even legal restrictions in place, especially during the reign of Augustus, which sought to curb the influence of actresses and performers in public. Despite these challenges, women in pantomime performances managed to carve out a space for themselves, showing that their abilities on stage were just as formidable as their male counterparts. Interestingly, the role of women in pantomimes may have also helped shift public perceptions about women in Roman society. These actresses, often portrayed as strong and confident figures on stage, were seen by some as symbols of feminine power. The female leads in pantomimes, through their gestures, movements, and expressions, would have provided an entirely new way for the audience to view women in a public context. Far from the docile, domestic roles women often held in the public eye, these performers were strong, emotive, and full of life. The performances they gave weren't just about beauty and grace. They were about power, emotion, and, sometimes, rebellion. In these performances, women didn't merely imitate life, they defined it. And their roles in pantomime weren't limited to portraying passive figures. They played queens, warriors, and gods, leading their characters through tales of love, war, betrayal, and redemption. For a fleeting moment, these women weren't confined to the traditional roles society assigned them. They were gods, lovers, and fighters, taking the stage and owning it. Historians still debate how the inclusion of women in pantomimes affected broader Roman society. Did these performances challenge the status quo, or were they just another way for women to entertain and be admired by a mostly male audience? The answer is likely a combination of both. Women in pantomimes weren't merely passive figures. They actively participated in and shaped the entertainment landscape of ancient Rome. As the history of Roman pantomimes continues to unfold, it's important to remember that these performances weren't just confined to the private villas of the rich or the grand theaters of Rome. They were also staged in one of the most iconic and intimidating arenas in the Roman world, the Colosseum. Yes, The Colosseum, known for its gladiatorial battles and epic contests, was also the stage for some of the most breathtaking and elaborate pantomime performances. Imagine yourself sitting among the vast, row upon row of spectators, the Colosseum's arches towering above you. The air is thick with excitement as the usual bloody spectacle of gladiatorial combat is replaced by something entirely different. Pantomime performances, often staged between the more violent and dangerous events, brought an entirely different kind of energy to the Colosseum. There you are, surrounded by tens of thousands of people, eagerly awaiting a performance that would captivate not with violence, but with the grace of movement and the magic of music. It was a stunning contrast to the usual bloodshed. Yet, in many ways, it was just as intense. These pantomimes in the Colosseum weren't small affairs. They were grand events, often involving large casts of performers, intricate costumes, and elaborate music. The performances would take up a large portion of the day, filling the arena with music, dance, and story, before the next gladiatorial fight would take place. In some ways, it's hard to imagine the Colosseum being used for such peaceful purposes, given its history as a venue for brutal combat. But, in the eyes of many Romans, the spectacle of a pantomime was just as important as any gladiator's fight. It was an opportunity to witness human skill, emotion, and artistry on a grand scale. One of the most fascinating aspects of pantomimes in the Colosseum was the way they were staged. The space was vast, and the actors had to adjust to this enormous, open setting, unlike smaller, intimate theaters where every gesture could be seen clearly. The actors in the Colosseum had to project their emotions and actions on a grand scale. This meant their movements were often bigger, more exaggerated, and designed to reach every corner of the arena. Imagine the performers dancing across the stage, their costumes billowing behind them as they acted out stories of gods, monsters, and warriors. The music would rise and fall, sweeping the audience into the story as the actors' movements painted a picture in the air. In this setting, pantomimes weren't just about the performers themselves. The Colosseum allowed for large-scale stage effects, such as changing backdrops, props, and even the occasional mechanical effects. The Romans were masters of engineering, and they used their expertise to enhance the spectacle. The Colosseum could be transformed into a grand stage for these performances, creating an immersive experience that went beyond simple acting. It was a performance on a scale that could rival anything we might see in modern theater today, though with the added bonus of being set in one of the most famous buildings in history. However, not everyone was thrilled with the idea of pantomimes being staged in the Colosseum. Some Roman elites viewed it as a dumbing down of the space. After all, wasn't the Colosseum meant for more serious and violent entertainments, like gladiatorial combat? Yet, despite these criticisms, the performances continued, and the Colosseum became a place where people could enjoy the grandeur of Roman theater without the bloodshed. It's a testament to the power of pantomimes that they could carve out a place for themselves in such an iconic venue. When you think of the Colosseum today, it's easy to imagine the gladiators and the fighting, the roars of the crowd, and the spectacle of ancient combat. But it's worth remembering that Roman entertainment wasn't just about blood and battle. It was also about the beauty of movement, the power of music, and the emotions that could be conveyed without a single word. The pantomime staged in the Colosseum proved that there was room for both the savage and the sublime in the heart of ancient Rome. As the days passed and the Roman Empire expanded, the art of pantomime continued to evolve and shift. becoming an increasingly integral part of Roman culture. But just as the Roman Empire began to decline, so too did the popularity of pantomimes, the grand performances, once held in theaters and the Colosseum, started to fade from the public eye. So, what happened? Why did this art form, which had once captured the attention of emperors and commoners alike, fall into obscurity? Picture yourself standing in the ruins of an ancient Roman theater. The seats are cracked and overgrown with ivy. The grand stage now just a shadow of what it once was. The music has long since stopped playing, and the performers' grand costumes have vanished. In their place, the theater stands as a monument to a different time, one where the pantomimes brought life, joy, and tears to the crowds. What happened to them? The decline of pantomime performances coincides with the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century. As the empire crumbled, so did many of its cultural traditions, including pantomimes. The reasons for this decline are varied, but one of the main factors was the changing nature of entertainment. With the rise of Christianity and its dominance over the Roman world, many forms of public entertainment, particularly those that were seen as morally questionable, came under scrutiny. Pantomimes, with their exaggerated gestures and physicality, were often viewed as frivolous or even morally suspect by early Christian leaders. Church officials decried the performances as a distraction from piety, and they slowly became less popular in the public sphere. Historians still debate how much influence the rise of Christianity had on the decline of Roman pantomime. Some argue that the Church's disapproval played a significant role in pushing pantomimes out of the spotlight, while others suggest that the art form was simply out of fashion by the time the empire collapsed. Regardless of the cause, what's clear is that pantomimes were no longer the centerpiece of Roman culture that they once were. By the time the Roman Empire fell, pantomimes had nearly disappeared, their performers relegated to the fringes of society. But even as pantomimes began to vanish from the Roman world, their legacy lived on. The idea of silent, exaggerated acting continued to influence theater, both in the Roman world and beyond. In fact, pantomime performances can be seen as the precursors to modern forms of silent acting and mime performances. In many ways, the theatrical tradition of physicality, emotion, and silence passed down through the ages, finding new life in forms of entertainment like ballet, silent films, and even modern mime performances. Even in the early Middle Ages, when the fall of Rome had left much of the Western world in a state of upheaval, the concept of pantomime had not been forgotten. Performances that relied on the body, gesture, and expression to tell a story, albeit less structured, began to reappear in the cultural traditions of various European regions. These performances, while not true Roman pantomimes, were shaped by the same principles of silent acting that had made Roman pantomimes so captivating. It's fascinating to consider how an art form so central to Roman life could simply fade into history, overshadowed by the changing tides of culture and politics. Yet, as you look around at modern performances, whether in the theater or on film, you can still trace a thread back to the pantomimes of ancient Rome. The influence of those silent performers can be seen in the exaggerated body language and silent expressions of today's mime artists, as well as the timeless appeal of physical comedy. So, even though Roman pantomimes have long since disappeared from the public stage, their legacy is far from forgotten. It lingers in the arts and entertainment we enjoy today. And the memory of those early performers, their costumes, their gestures, Their ability to move an audience without words continues to shape the way we experience stories. Now that we've explored the rise and fall of Roman pantomimes, let's take a moment to reflect on how the impact of these performances extends far beyond their time. The influence of pantomime can be found not just in ancient theater, but in nearly every form of entertainment we enjoy today. In fact, the foundation laid by Roman pantomimes, its emphasis on physicality, emotion, and movement, continues to reverberate throughout history, even in forms of theater and performance that seem miles away from its origins. Consider the world of silent films. Can you picture the classic figures of silent film, Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, or Harold Lloyd? These performers, known for their mastery of physical comedy, were essentially modern-day pantomimes. They used exaggerated gestures, facial expressions, and impeccable timing to convey complex emotions without saying a single word. The influence of Roman pantomime on their work is undeniable. Just as Roman pantomime actors could elicit laughter, sadness, or suspense through their movements, these silent film stars were able to communicate the same range of emotions without dialogue. Relying on the universal language of movement, it's easy to see how the legacy of Roman pantomimes, once performed under the warm Roman sun and in the grandeur of the Colosseum, still carries on in our movie theaters today. Similarly, modern-day stage performances often borrow from the principles of pantomime. In the world of theater, physical theater and contemporary dance often embrace exaggerated movements, body language, and silence, all elements pioneered by the Roman pantomimes. In many modern productions, especially those that require strong visual storytelling, you'll find traces of pantomime's influence. Performers on stage today still use their bodies to express emotion and action, often relying on movement alone to convey complex narratives. It's incredible to think that the same techniques that made Roman audiences gasp or laugh are still alive in these modern forms. And let's not forget the continued fascination with mime artists. From the traditional mime performances of Marcel Marceau to contemporary street performers, the art of mime has roots in the very same principles developed by the Roman pantomime actors. The use of silent gestures, invisible objects, and exaggerated expressions is a direct line back to the performances that captivated ancient Roman crowds. These mime artists, though they no longer perform in grand stone theaters or before vast audiences in the Colosseum, still follow the same traditions established by those early Roman performers. It's a beautiful reminder that, while the world of pantomimes may have changed, its core elements live on. Now, imagine a world where the ancient art of pantomime had never faded, where we still gathered in large theaters, not to hear dialogue, but to watch performers convey entire worlds with nothing but their bodies and the music accompanying them. It's not hard to see how the power of this art form, with its universal appeal and emotional depth, could continue to captivate audiences today. Roman pantomimes were more than just entertainment. They were a testament to the power of the human body and its ability to convey stories, ideas, and emotions without the need for words. And as we close this journey through Roman pantomimes, think about how the past, though long gone, continues to shape our present. The art of pantomime, with its mix of physicality, silent expression, and emotional depth, has not only survived, but thrived in various forms across centuries. Its influence is undeniable, from silent films to modern theater. And its legacy remains a vital part of how we tell stories today. As we sit back and reflect on the great theater of ancient Rome, we are reminded that art, in all its forms, transcends time. what began as a way to entertain the masses in grand theaters, beneath the watchful eyes of emperors, continues to touch our hearts and minds, proving that even in silence, there is a language that speaks to us all. As we come to the final chapter of our exploration into the world of Roman pantomimes, let's take a deep breath and slow down. Picture yourself back in ancient Rome, the music fading into the background, the actors' movements still lingering in your mind. You've been captivated by the performances, from the grand tragedies to the light-hearted comedies. And now it's time to reflect on how these silent storytellers, these masters of movement, left an imprint on the world that we still carry with us today. Roman pantomimes were more than just entertainment. They were a mirror to society, reflecting its joys, sorrows, and the complexities of human emotion. The actors, with their grand costumes, exaggerated gestures, and finely tuned performances, captured the essence of life itself, drawing their audience into a shared experience that transcended language. There was no need for dialogue, no need for words. The human body, the music, and the environment were enough to convey entire stories. The performers didn't just act, they became the story. But as we know, nothing lasts forever. As the Roman Empire faded and new cultural and religious forces emerged, the popularity of pantomimes waned. The theaters fell silent, and the grand performances that once filled the Colosseum with laughter, gasps, and tears faded into history. Yet, the legacy of Roman pantomimes lived on in unexpected ways, buried beneath the layers of time but never fully erased. Today, we can still see the echoes of those ancient performances in everything from modern theater to silent films, to the mime artists we encounter in the streets. In a way, the beauty of Roman pantomimes lies in their simplicity. They didn't need words to communicate. They relied on the universal language of movement, a language that transcended boundaries and connected people from all walks of life. Whether you were an emperor or a commoner, sitting in the same theater, you could understand the joy, the sorrow, the love, and the tragedy that was unfolding before your eyes. And perhaps, in our busy modern world, there is something deeply comforting about remembering a time when stories could be told without the need for constant chatter, when silence spoke as loudly as words. As you drift off into a more peaceful state, consider this. The Romans knew something profound about communication. They understood that stories could be told with the simplest of tools: the body, music, and emotion. And perhaps, in this fast-paced world, we can still learn from their example. After all, a story well told, whether through words, music, or movement, can transcend time and continue to touch the hearts of those who listen, regardless of where or when they live. So, as you relax and close your eyes, let the echoes of those ancient performances, filled with drama, comedy, and emotion, whisper their way into your dreams. Roman pantomimes may be long gone, but their spirit, their art, and their impact on our cultural world will never fade away.